I can tell you about that.
Well, George, do you want to take a turn? No, you've been described to me, and I think this was meant as a great compliment, as a bit of a wharf rat. Did you try and grow up down there someplace?
I'm George Rockwood. I tried to be a wharf rat. I wanted to become a sailor, but all I ever turned out to be was a yachtsman. But my father was retired by the time I was born. He was 66 and had been looking for a place to bring his wife, who was not well. This was previous to my mother. Wanted to bring her to some place outside of Worcester, where we grew up and where he lived, in order to give her a little bit better air to breathe. He came down and rented a house on Bayview Road, right across from the place we have now, for the summers of 1927 and 28. At the end of 28, he bought a fairly good-sized piece of property, which my sister, a younger sister, and I grew up in. I was brought down here by my parents in 1934 when I was 4.5 months old. And I wish I remembered those summers of 34, 5, 6, but I don't. I've seen movies of what I was doing, which wasn't very much, but as soon as I was old enough to toddle down to the harbor, I went. So we were fortunate in having a little neighborhood in which trespassing was not considered a problem. Everybody's children and adults trespass onto and across everyone else's property. My father had and I still have a little bit of land on Wychmere Harbor with a dock, so we were able to go down and hang around boats, and I came down here every June 15. We had a rigid schedule. June 15 was the banner day of every year. We left Worcester behind, came down here to Paradise.
And took your shoes off.
Took shoes off and so on. And September 15 was the miserable low point of every year when we got into our cars and went back to Worcester. I've always associated sunshine and bright, clean air and so on with Cape Cod and Harwichport, and dirty, dank rain and misery in Worcester, although we lived in a lovely part of Worcester, but it wasn't lovely to me. I wanted to be here. I had a big thrill in 1948 when, during our school spring vacation, my mother brought the two of us, my sister and me, down here in March, and I saw snow on the Cape for the first time, and it was cold, and I thought it was absolutely wonderful. We went over to Nauset and looked down the bluff at the 88-foot dragger Cape Ann that had just come ashore there about a month before, 3 weeks before. And I thought, I had been reading about Cape Cod shipwrecks, about Gloucester schooners, and those things that interested me, and I was really thrilled to see a real shipwreck down on Nauset Beach. And so that was a big high point up to that time. But since then I've been sailing as much as possible. It's almost all been yachting, and a lot of racing and cruising here and there. And so that's been my obsession, and still is. I became acquainted a little with the history of this town by talking to people who knew it, and particularly Wychmere Harbor and Stonehorse Yacht Club and the Lee Shipbuilding Company, Skipper's grandfather's very fine boat building company, and my father's role in that. And along with Uncle Ted, I called him Davy's father, Ted Davis. My father, our next door neighbor, Waldo Brown, and a number of other people got together and formed the Stonehorse Yacht Club in 1933. And my father had a good bit to do with that, although he he didn't care much about sailing. He thought boats were very interesting, difficult, and therefore interesting hydrodynamic problems, aerodynamic problems, but he generally was glad to leave the sailing to other people. But, he was a little distressed at my one-track mindedness about it, but that's the way it was, so.
I remember not too long, and I'm not part of this water group, except I just like all this stuff so much. Not too many years after we came here, when I was a kid, my dad was invited to be the chaplain of Stonehurst.
Yes.
I would like you all to know, we never had a boat, so you were at least, he was the chaplain and enjoyed that very much.
Well, I remember your father when he came in
Yeah.
as chaplain.
Yeah.
And prayed that we would all be saved from the perils of the sea.
Of the sea, yes, yeah.
Summers.
Well, I remember crewing a couple summers on a bullseye out of Stonehurst, Carol Kurosh and a couple of other kids. And I thought it was a pretty terrifying business myself, so the perils of the sea aren't much of an exaggeration. I was always late for work at my brother's 5 and 10 because I was out on that boat. I thought, I think I'm supposed to be working, not doing that. What a nice obsession you had. Do you want to take a turn, Chris?
Sure. I'm Chris Green. I moved here with my family in 1970, I think. And we'd always had small boats. We had a boat down on the Jersey Shore. We lived in Pennsylvania before we lived here. So when we got to the Cape, we brought our boat with us, and we berthed it in Saquatucket Harbor. And the very first summer that we were there, I got to know a few of the fishermen and started doing a little fishing, summers, and then through end of high school and after high school, I fished commercially mostly. Did a few other things. I worked for Woods Hole for a short time. Well, a few other odd jobs, all the construction work in the winter, but pretty much fished every summer. Until mid-80s, I guess. I went to work on land for 6 or 7 years straight. And then I got a small boat and wound up kind of migrating back to the water and fishing summers and working on land ever since. And
Out of Saquatucket?
Wychmere mostly.
Wychmere.
Yeah.
Fishing where and for what?
All kinds of things. Everything from lobsters to striped bass and scallops. And, mostly cod fishing back in the day, but lately it's been more tuna fish and striped bass for me. Crewed on some boats with some of the old timers. Harry Hunt, he was a real character.
Oh, gosh.
And that was very interesting. Made a little money. At that time, Harry was he sold some land. He was pretty wealthy. Didn't really care about the money, but he still liked to keep the boat going. So toward the end there, he was pretty much taking expenses out and giving me the rest. So that worked out really well for me.
That's a nice deal.
Yeah, that's a real deal.
Good deal.
Yeah, and so that's how I wound up around the water. Just from the very first summer I was here. Fishing with a guy named John Bullard. I have no idea what he's doing now. He's been still around. That was my first time commercial fishing, and I fell in love with it. I thought that was the best thing I'd ever done.
It's a good thing there are people who would fall in love with it, because that's doggone hard, cold, early morning
Yeah,
work.
yeah, it can be hard. It can be hard. But, you get a lot of time off also, bad weather and whatnot. When you do work, I mean, it's very intense and long hours. And you breaks up the year a lot. You're never doing the same thing all the time.
Isn't that a Cape thing, though? You do this, and
Yeah.
I remember, and I was thinking of, when you were talking about Fred Kroll earlier, and Wayne Robinson. I remember talking to Carolyn when I was working on the Harwich book, and she was speaking of the men that age, young Fred and young Wayne and a bunch of others, who went off to the war, and their attitude was that when they got home, if they got home safe and sound, they were going to find whatever it took to be here, to work here, and they didn't want to cross the bridge again. They wanted to get home and they wanted to stay home. So I think you find men and possibly women who do what it takes to be here. They love it, and they're not going to. Nobody's ever going to roll in money, but you do one thing at one time of the year, and there's Skipper Lee. Would you like to tell us who you are?
Hi, I'm Skipper Lee. I grew up on Wychmere Harbor, and Jill Morgan at the time was my sailing instructor when I was about that big. So we have a lot of history.
That's another program.
Yeah.
That'd be good.
But I grew up walking, getting off the school bus and losing my shoes in the mud in Wychmere Harbor. And Jimmy Hayes was a gas boy on a fuel dock, and you had all the characters like Harry Hunt, and Bobby Brown, Bud McKinney, Ted Brown. Bud Brown was building boats over behind the clam bar. So I was just kind of a dock rat.
Bud McKinney built the house I live in now.
Really?
And I'd like to talk to him about some of the piping and wiring. Go ahead, Skipper.
There were a lot of characters.
Yeah.
So I spent my time there, and there were some guys, Bobby Robbins, Bill Matheson, doing charter fishing out of there. And I'd go around, and I had a wagon. I'd go over, clean the boat for a bluefish, and then I'd tow the wagon around and sell the bluefish for
How old were you
$2 a
then?
piece. I was about 8. And I made a little bit of money. Bobby Robbins told me later on that he always had to clean the boat after I cleaned the boat. But it was, he gave me the fish anyway. And Ted Brown was the first guy to bring me around Monomoy Point, and went to the Pendleton on the Bessie T. And then the Brocote was down there, the Foxy Lady, Gary Bissonette was working for Harry. I remember Bobby Brown back in the Sea Fever up into the ice one winter. He wanted to go fishing, and there was heavy ice. And they cut ice for about a week. Brand new chainsaws before they gave up. They only made it to the fuel dock. It was a lot of fun growing up down there as a kid. It really was. Jill used to bring me out to Monomoy, and all the boats were out there. There was all kinds of things. We lost the Scott one day and had to walk to Chatham. So, I don't know. That's probably my young history growing up on Wychmere Harbor. A lot of great memories. George was Allen's Harbor I didn't see much of, but certainly knew the Nichols well enough, you know. And later I fished with Chris, so it's kind of like family, you know, everybody down there. At one point in time, doesn't feel that way now,
No,
Yeah.
but it wasn't, it was,
Yeah.
at one time.
but it was family, wasn't it?
And your grandfather's name was William Davis Lee.
Yes. And he had the boatyard. But that was before my time. I never met my grandfather.
That's right.
So it was my father.
I worked there for 2 years, clocking.
I remember Wayne walking around when I was a little boy, Wayne Robinson, walk around the harbor every day. He walked from his house to the boatyard
Yeah.
and back every day. And he's the one who wore the path around the harbor, I think.
When I first met the Robinsons when I was a kid, I thought Wayne looked like a pioneer. He looked like a man that should be driving a Conestoga wagon out west someplace, and instead he was down here building and fixing. And I remember one quote from him, and I'm going to bring Jill into it again, because I followed along very carefully and did several stories about, and took lots of pictures of when her crazy father was building that concrete boat. When Russ was building the ferro cement boat, I still have pictures, and I just and followed it right to the water that day.
Yeah.
And I think Dad, didn't he go on and give it a blessing?
Yeah.
Yes, I thought he did. Probably really glad it didn't go to the bottom of the harbor. But anyway, Wayne came over one day, and we were talking about this idea that you could build a boat out of cement. And Wayne said, I build boats too. He said, but I use that old-fashioned stuff, wood. So I wish he were here. When you talk about not going to Allen Harbor much, what's always seemed interesting to me, and not being a boat or a water person, is the three harbors are completely different. They really are, aren't they? You've got the twisty channel of Allen Harbor that makes it for one kind. You don't see too many sailboats trying to get in and out of there. when I first went there, Brad Clark was running the taxi. Remember big tall Brad?
Sure do. He a football player.
We thought he was some cute.
Oh,
Anyway,